Welcome to the In-Betwixt and In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping leaders embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence wherever you are on your leadership journey. Good morning to you, John.
Josh, I've actually been thinking this for a few episodes. Every time we get on the podcast, I want to do, the Jason Derulo, but with your name. I just want to do the Jason Derulo. I want to go like Joshua Hugo. And so this is my chance at that. I think we should do that instead of the opening lines from here on out, is just opening with your name, just like that. Thoughts?
Yeah, shout out to Jason Derulo. Honestly, I probably could.
If he wants to be on the podcast, he can come on as well.
Yeah, he's welcome. I'm going to kind of just show my ignorance of general pop music, though. I probably know one of his songs, and I've definitely heard his name, but I couldn't pick him out of a crowd.
I could not sing one for you right now. I just know that every song he sings his name in it. So
okay,
that's the main thing. And again, Joshua Hugo just sounds a lot like that.
It is. Yeah, it's designed to do that. It's the 5-syllable name. Yours doesn't work.
I think our listenership would go way up if they do. They could hear us sing each other's names differently each episode as well.
Yeah, and if any of you out there are really good at singing and are interested in creating an intro musical clip to our podcast, give us a shout out. I've also learned that most of these requests we make online to either share things or comment or reach out to us, there's a couple who are doing that really consistently, but after podcasting now for a few years, these requests kind of just fly out into the ether and people chuckle and then move on. But if you are an aspiring musician who wants a platform to make a little opening jingle for our podcast, we're taking it.
I think, or on Wait, Don't Tell Me, they send a recording of the host on their voice machines. Well, now it's voicemails, I guess. But I don't know. The option here could be just like each week you get to do our intro for us for that week. So if you call in, leave a comment, and request to leave an entry, just let us know. We'll let you do it. So
yeah, we'll probably let you do it. Yeah, let's not commit fully. We got to vet this a little bit. But yeah, the spirit of that request still lives. But let's jump in. So last week, we left things where we were kind of going through that 3-part series and starting first with the relationship between you and yourself, essentially, as a manager, and then you and your manager, so your superior, if you will. And then last week, we kind of kicked off what will likely become a pretty consistent focus, but the relationship between you and the people you manage. And we left a reflection for last week that was 2 questions. How well are you performing? If you remember the visual, we kind of had 2 thermometers vertically side by side, and the left thermometer was a temperature check about how well you're performing, where the top of it's like super hot, doing great. And then the right thermometer was how well are you leading performers? And so if you did not yet do that reflection, I encourage you to do that, because it's really an important tool to see the difference between moving from the doer mindset that often exists as an individual contributor to the manager, the leading mindset, where it's not just about your own performance, but that of those you lead.
Yeah, and hot take, if your performance is really high and your folks is really low, or the inverse of that, you think your folks is really high and yours is really low, you might be wrong, because so much of how you're doing as a manager should relate to how they're doing. So
right. Yeah.
If you see that, then you're like, wait, maybe how I think I'm doing isn't either as bad or as good as I thought it was. So yeah,
it's really interesting. I don't want to get too stuck in that, but yeah, what if your thermometer was super low, you're not performing well and your team's performing great? That's kind of, to your point, probably less common, but it could be a case in which your team looks at you and says, I don't know if I can get behind this person, because they just seem to be, stuck in their office playing games, and we're out here, working our tails off. So that awareness piece is really important. I don't know that that's as common, but it absolutely could be. And that would be a dangerous perception issue to ignore. So more to talk about, I'm sure, with all of this, but I think we want to move forward today into a strand of that last area of you and the people that you lead, and talk a little bit about communication. So John, you take it away.
Yeah, I think likely to go off on several episodes here over who knows how long a period of time, just on kind of skill sets and foundational things that are important to leading. But we'll, of course, try to talk about them in the vein of you as a middle manager. And again, as what are the tensions that exist with these skill sets for anyone in this position. So we're going with communication. And I think that's an easy place to go. There's lots of, as a concept anyway, there's tons of books out there. You can probably listen to hundreds of podcasts on this. You can read articles on the nature of communication. You know, Josh, even last week or a couple weeks ago when we talked about the 4 quadrants exercise, where you talk about support and accountability, right? That's a form of communication. Like, how am I communicating support for you, but holding you accountable at the same time, right? And so the point being is that there's lots to think about when it comes to communication. We could cover a whole podcast probably on communication, right? That could be just the concept. So why is that? Why is this so foundational? And I want to give a brief explanation or kind of insight into a tool that I have been trained on recently, which is, it's called blind spotting. So this is a book that came out by a guy named Marty Dubin. It's Harvard Business Review book. It's really about, at the heart of it is about understanding and seeing your blind spots as a leader. Okay. So lots I could get into. If you're interested, call me up, get the book. I'll coach you through it. It'll be great. But one of the things that is the premise of the book is that there are really 6 key areas where you can have a blind spot. At the heart of that is your motives for something. On kind of an outer layer outside of that is how you think about your intellect, the behaviors you show, and the traits that you exhibit, your characteristics. And on the most outer area is your identity and your behavior. And I really want to talk about identity and behavior, because what those ultimately end up being are the first things that people see about you as a leader. That is the most obvious, it's the most explicit. Whereas motive, sometimes you don't even know why you have certain motives, right? And then there's a lot of more unpacking to that. Whereas behaviors you can begin to tackle. One of the key behaviors that people see right away is the way I do or do not communicate, right? That is just at the heart of it. They notice the things that you're not saying. They notice your facial expressions. They notice when your body language exhibits enthusiasm or excitement, or when it's indicating something's not right. They notice the way that your tone changes in certain circumstances, right? It is the most obvious one that we're aware of, right? And again, the behavior is not just the words that come out of my mouth. It's the way I listen to you. It's the way I respond to things. And so at the heart of it, communication is the thing that lets people know, number one, where they're matching up or kind of where they're at with us, or how they think they're at with us based on how we're acting and how we communicate our relationship to them, right? Or communicate how we're feeling about a situation. Now, that can tell us a lot about what's the emotion I'm feeling, what's the motive I have behind something, right? But at the heart of it, that is why we think communication is so important to start with, because it is the behavior that people see right away, right? In one form or another. And so, I think that kind of covers it. Josh, anything I missed there? Anything you want to add to why this is such a foundational thing?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you've said. And really, I think that's a fascinating, model of the idea of motive, is that almost that those tendencies, those motives, those things that are very subconscious that drive what becomes the observable behavior. And to your point, you can adjust behaviors. It takes more work to really assess and suss out those tendencies and motives. Love that. Yeah, there's so much that we can get into around communication, but even to just, add to what you've shared as to why are we starting with this, and this will get us to our tension here in a moment, that kind of limbo space with communication, is that we often get so stuck thinking about our primary role, which it is, but our primary role just immediately as a manager, as a leader, becomes how we execute, how we grow our team's capacity.
Yeah.
Right? How are we actually going out to doing the work? But when we bypass intentional mindfulness about our team's communication, our own communication, we find ourselves preventing our team from building meaningful trust with one another. We often bypass truly being able to get aligned. We often hear that word, right? Get aligned. Are we aligned? Are we all on the same page? If you can't communicate effectively or know that what you're actually trying to communicate hasn't landed on your team, and you ask this question, are we all on the same page? There's a good chance that you're going to have a biased answer that leads you in the wrong direction.
Right.
So to kind of put it into this, almost thinking of it almost as a pyramid, communication is at the base of it. And if you don't have intentional development, intentional self-awareness, intentional training, and mindfulness across your team around how you're all communicating, it's going to be very difficult to get aligned, to execute, and to build your team's capacities.
Yep. And a reminder, again, given our audience here, or who we're aiming this audience for, it's your team. But what makes us different as well, it's how you communicate with your boss. How do you communicate with other, parallel managers? And so again, it's that 360-degree view of everyone that's within the organization that you're a part of,
That's
and
right.
how do you think about communicating in those different contexts? So yeah,
That's right.
yeah,
Well, to give us maybe a little bit of, let's take this out from 30,000 feet and maybe, descend 10,000 feet a little bit. Is I'll pose a formula
hmm
about communication that we can kind of tease out as we talk today. Is that communication is equals, so we'll do a little math, transmission plus reception, right? So communication is not simply the transmission of information. Communication requires that it is received. And without both parts of that formula happening, what you're not actually doing is you're not actually communicating, right? You're possibly just talking or you're possibly just hearing, and it requires both parties to be aware of their own tendencies of how they transmit and how others receive, as well as being aware of how others transmit and how you receive. And so we're going to kind of spend more time on this concept today. And John, maybe help us bring this all together with what's the tension we're really trying to navigate here? What is this kind of liminal space, this limbo of communication?
yeah. And I think we are, again, a lot of this is geared towards people who are maybe still figuring out what it means to be a manager and are really thinking about that for the first time. And so the way that I think Josh and I would frame this, and we've kind of gone back and forth on a couple ways, but I think we're getting at the same thing. But I'm going to use Josh's term here, is the tension between my accidental communication, right? And what we'll say is more of your intentional communication. So what happens here? Well, often with young leaders, we really hone in on, or new managers, we hone on in on what we think is the intentional communication. The way I set up a meeting with someone, if I'm leading a meeting of a group of people, how I frame the agenda and then discuss something there, or if I'm leading a whole team meeting or a professional development session, what's my communication there? And you might even end up practicing that language. You might even practice how to say it. You might go through that with your boss. You're really intentional about that. Then there's the accidental communication, running into someone in the hallway. What happens when I'm on my way to another meeting? What happens in the first 5 minutes when I sit down and we haven't really gotten into the agenda of something, right? What happens on the walk out of the building when I'm chatting with someone? So there's this accidental and intentional. Even your intentional ones, if you're not really careful, can be accidental because you say things off the cuff or say things
That's
you
right.
don't mean. I thought about this as informal and formal, because even in informal situations, like there's a lot more informal situations that don't have to feel accidental. So I think maybe it's more of like, where are the informal ways that I'm communicating versus the formal? Again, formal, go back to those meetings, those development sessions you run, et cetera. Informal are not the scripted parts of your day. No, they're the non-prepared, non-scripted parts. The thing that we think is the bigger tension is people who are unaware that both of those types of communications exist often put them on like very opposite ends. They're very prepared on the intentional stuff, but the gap between that and how they communicate kind of informally or accidental becomes problematic because they're not aware of it. They're not understanding that even if you were friends with that person for a decade before you became their boss, now they're looking to you to understand how does John really feel about this situation? I bet Josh doesn't like this either. I want to see if he says something snarky about it to show that like deep down he doesn't like what we're having to do. And if you're not aware of that, that's a problem. Now, I think there's a lot of value in being natural and authentic and being able to just have like normal conversations with folks. If you essentially do that where like you're not aware that people are always watching you, you're going to end up saying things that undermine your leadership and undermine the
Yeah.
work that you and the overall team and organization are trying to do. So for us, the tension is, how do you narrow the gap enough? You never want to bring the formal and informal or the accidental and kind of intentional all the way together, because they're different styles of communication. But you have to narrow the gap so that you're very aware of what you're communicating, what you're saying. How do you provide motivation and inspiration while also giving people clear directives of what the boundaries are, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, I think the tension is, how do you make sure that that gap is narrow enough that the impact is not that I'm only very formal and I never have these informal like conversations with folks, and so people think of me stiff, but also in those informal moments, I'm not saying things to undermine my leadership and others.
Yeah.
Anyway, a little messy, but we think if you're not thinking about
Yeah.
how to bring those closer together and be very aware of how you're communicating in both spaces, you can get in problems one way or the other.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And I know we talked a little bit about this the other day, and I really appreciate how you are defining that tension between accidental versus intentional. And it's a little bit different than how I would see it. but it's not, I wouldn't say it's wrong at all. It's actually a super tangible and helpful way to think about it. So I want to add just a little bit of
Yeah.
flavor to the messiness as well. But I would say, and you mentioned this word awareness.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I would say that the other way to think about this tension as a leader, not just an early career leader or manager, but is how aware are you of your communication tendencies? To go back to motives and tendencies, how aware? And if you're not really striving to build awareness of your own tendencies, your motives, and how your behaviors show up, especially your communication behaviors, that is another form of being accidental.
Yeah. Totally.
Right, that's a form of being accidental. So it's not even just like the planned moments of the day and the informal parts. I love that because it's very clear. But there's also often assumptions we make is I'm just going to be the communicator I am in my work and I'm just going to show up and do that. And I don't have to, yeah, I'm very direct. I'm just a person. I'm going to be super direct. How many times have we heard that? Or I'm a little shy, right? We say the thing that we are, and that's good only as far as it is allowing you to like show some self-awareness. But if you're saying that I'm not going to be aware that other people don't receive my communication because I shut people down by my directness, well, then you're not actually really interested in communication. What you're
Yeah.
really just interested in is transmission,
Mhm.
right? And so, like, the self awareness and accidental concept is really what I would also say is part of this tension. And being not accidental, but intentional requires that I need to really be mindful of what are my tendencies as a transmitter?
Right.
What are my tendencies as a receiver? Do I kind of zone out? Do I go to the next thought that I want to say instead of actually listening? Am I waiting to just be understood instead of being, seeking to understand? So all of this fits into this really messy tension. But if we're to simplify and just say, at the end of the day, be really self-aware
Yeah.
about your communication, that is a real goal of kind of elevating this conversation.
Yeah. I think for me to summarize a little bit of what you said, I think maybe even better, we're always going to be kind of informally communicating. Sometimes we're formally communicating at other times. Now, the question is for either one of those, whether it's formal or informal, are we being what's the opposite? What would we say was the opposite of accidental? Intentional? Are you
Intentional.
being intentional about how you communicate in those spaces? Either one, or are you being just accidental? Right. And I think
Yeah.
the goal for any leader is be intentional. Right.
Yes.
I think it's interesting. A lot of people, I mean, not to go on too much of a tangent here, but a lot of folks will say, well, if I'm really guarded with what I say, then I'm not authentic and I'm not truthful. And my answer to that is, I don't know. I think in any, like, I don't always want to do scenarios with kids, but think about your kids. Like, I have a very wonderful, loving relationship with my children, but I certainly think about the things I say a lot differently than I do with my buddies who I went over for a football game this weekend, right? You have to be because I'm trying to attempt to do different things and I'm still authentic with my children about who I am, but I'm a different person for them. Right. And I think we talked about that a few weeks ago. You are somebody for more people now as a manager. And that means you have to change the way you communicate and what you promote so that they feel inspired, both that you believe in them, but also that you believe in the goals that you and the organization have set. Right. So I don't want people to think about this as when we're talking about being intentional versus accidental of don't be authentic. We're saying be smart and be purposeful and understand that people are looking to you and the way you lead differently than when you were in the role before as maybe an individual contributor.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
really like that you put that, kind of nailed that for us, Josh. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are we going to rip off the Band-Aid here a little bit and
Yeah.
share? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we can. I mean, I think for both of, and this will weave a little bit into the tool that we can share in a few moments as well. But we talked a little bit before this about sharing our own awareness and some of the places that we continue to work on growing. I'll name one of the places that, there's, of course, like there's accolades and affirmations about our communication, but there's some places that I have really learned I have to be more mindful about how I
Yeah.
transmit and receive. So one of the challenges that I have consistently found myself facing with my own tendencies, my own motives, perhaps as a communicator, is that I tend to talk a little bit more sometimes. And getting to brevity has been a goal of mine for a while. I'm a verbal processor. My creative tendencies to kind of get caught up in future thinking concepts often mean that what I say initially is not maybe exactly what I meant, which for others, that can sometimes be very frustrating because others
Mhm.
are very intentional. They won't speak unless they are very, very clear on what it is they want to say. That's just a different style. But I've had to learn that I need to be aware of my audience. I need to be aware of, that other people's methods and approaches to communication are going to transmit differently than I do. And I've had to really work on that. And in terms of receiving, one of my tendencies is if I'm not cautious, I find myself getting caught up on one of the things that I've heard somebody say. So if you make 4 points, I might be perseverating or thinking about that first point, and I miss the next two. And so trying to just be fully present as a
Yeah.
receiver of other people's communication is something that I actively have to work on. And I think there's a lot of things underneath that. The fear that if I, don't have something good to say after what I heard makes me not look as intelligent, or that I wasn't showing care because I couldn't engage with it. I think there's noble and less noble tendencies underneath all of our communication. But part of why I'm sharing that is simply to acknowledge that this is the work that we have to do as leaders, and we have to be aware of the things that we do or don't do that affect how people experience us and what it's like to be on the other side of us. So those are just a couple of reflections I wanted to
Yep.
share. John, I would love to hear reactions to that, or simply just sharing out what you're thinking as well.
No, I mean, I'd love to share, what gaps are that I've received over the years about my communication. So, certainly I've received many, and some of them are pretty context specific. They're specific to a moment in time, specific messaging, but one that I feel like has happened a couple of times is more of a receptive element for me. And it has to do with facial expression and body expression. And so,
Interesting.
I generally consider myself a pretty affable person. Felt like I tried to lead with that, although I think sometimes the internal stressors come out a bit more than I want them to. And so I have been told that, in two ways. One, I can have a pretty serious face or a serious expression or a worried expression quite a lot, even just walking around. The other one can actually be when receiving information that I don't like. It's pretty clear I don't. I actually was told once by a person, I didn't realize this, that, and I try not to do it anymore, and this is kind of embarrassing, but that when I didn't like something, I rolled my eyes. Like I lifted my eyes like this, like just more or less like to the top of my head. So like, I guess I was
Yeah.
a 13-year-old girl deep down. Man, that hit hard. Like, Jesus. I mean, I want to be better. I don't want to, have these facial expressions, but there's a lot of work I had to do at someone I managed, but a good friend of mine named Lauren. I asked her about that. I said, people say my face is real serious all the time. Like, what do you think? And she's like, well, you have a serious job. So yeah, you have a serious face. And I was like, oh no, she was so nice about it. And so the point being is there's a lot of work to make sure that remains at a minimum flat, at best, something that they're not reading too much into, because it's more about listening.
Yeah.
It's actually about controlling my thoughts a little bit and not giving into the like judging thoughts. It's just, I'm just listening. I really have to train myself to listen versus judging the thoughts. And then that controls my body reaction or my facial reaction to it as well. Because sometimes that's just my gut reaction, but then I'm actually processing a lot and thinking through it and don't dislike what they said as much as my face would have given into in the moment. So
Yeah.
the point being here is there's lots for each of us to work on. And if you don't think there is with your communication, then you're kind of fooling yourself, right? And so we really think. So one of the ways that we really like to do that is we really recommend that people take at some level some sort of self-awareness assessment to kind of help you out with that. And I want to turn it to Josh, who is going to walk us through one that Josh has brought up a lot of tools from an organization and structure he's worked with called Giant. One of those things is called the 5 Voices. I'd love, Josh, for you to give a brief overview of what that is and why this particular one might be useful when we talk about communication and our styles of communication.
Yeah, thanks, John. And just to brief context as well, I think both John and I would say that there's a number of valuable tools out there that can provide insight. And so I think that when it comes to communication, before you even open yourself up to a tool, there's a certain degree of vulnerability and exposure to some potentially challenging internal thoughts and internal motives or tendencies that you will have to confront and that we have to confront. And it's not linear, right? The growth of saying, like, I'm moving towards better understanding my tendencies as a communicator and as a person isn't, okay, last week I learned to stop rolling my eyes, so I never do it again. And last week I learned to talk less, so I don't. It is a constant awareness. I wouldn't call it a battle necessarily, but a constant awareness cycle of your tendencies versus your behaviors. And so The value of it, like we debated, I don't want to say a debate, but we talked a lot about, what about personality tools? Well, we both use them in our private practices, but there's a lot of ability to see these as like any tool as defined as a helpful way to gain additional insight. And so I don't want to go to too much depth. We're going to leave the link in this week's podcast notes about the five voices, but the five voices for teams is a tool that I've learned how to use. I've used across actually now several different organizations internally as well as a consultant. And it takes the Myers-Briggs type index. So those 16 different ENFPs, INFJs,
Yep.
all of that. And it repackages them into five voices that are built into all of us. So we have all of them, and we have our foundational voice. That is the one that is our unconscious competence. We don't even have to think to access it. And then we kind of see that move towards, I have a couple of consciously competent voices. I choose to use them, but they come relatively natural. And then we have a voice, that fourth out of five, that we actually think we're better at than we are. And that's kind of our unconscious incompetence. And then we have our fifth, which we can use and we sometimes reference when we must, but it is a voice that we are consciously aware that we're not very good at. And so the framework of all of these helps us to kind of think about how certain things are more natural for us than others. And so to build on that first point, the framework takes it into the kind of two axes. So there's an axis that is about how we process, which again is a Myers-Briggs correlation. How we process, we either process things based on future or we process things based on present, and then
Yeah.
how we make decisions. Decisions based on people and values primarily, or instead of people and values, we generally will make decisions based on logic and facts. And so with that set of axes, the five voices are mapped out. And so you have a couple of future-oriented voices, three of them specifically: connectors, pioneers, and creatives. And our connectors are the voices that make decisions based on people and values, always kind of focused in the future. Pioneers are making decisions about systems and strategy, logic, small percentage of the population, but they're often the ones who kind of show up as kind of the forceful and strategic leaders. Creatives actually toggle between making decisions on people and values or facts and figures. And we have a huge percentage of the population, actually over 70% based on Myers-Briggs, who are present-oriented voices, guardians, making decisions often on facts and logic, and then nurturers. Over 43% of the population's in that upper left quadrant of people who make decisions based on people and values and what's most important right now. So all of that said, visually that might have been a little tricky to follow, but the point being that these all help us to kind of understand tendencies. And even going through these exercises myself, with my own family, with my partner, and with members of my team, have helped me to uncover tendencies that exist due to my nature. And I've made choices and I've been nurtured to develop skills and capacity in other spaces. And it's helped me to improve, I hope, for the most part, how my communication is both transmitted as well as received. So just a 3-minute crash course. Would be happy for folks to learn more about it. We'll leave a link in the comments here, and you can take a free assessment. It will give you some really helpful insights about your communication.
Yeah, totally. I took the five voices. I think it's wonderful, a great way of kind of exploring the different modes with which you communicate. So highly recommend it. Josh is offering it up for free, so take advantage. Additionally, I mentioned blind spotting earlier. If you're interested in learning more about that or an assessment there, I also have some free assessments there. Please reach out and I'm happy to provide you with that. So that's going to wrap us for today. I think we've got a lot more to say on communication upcoming, but I think today getting into the behaviors behind it and how self-awareness can help you think about why you're communicating is very key. One other thing is do your own reflection on, like, similar to what Josh and I shared with you, what's your gaps when it comes to your communication right now? Ask people, make sure you know so that you can be aware of that and start using strategies to adjust that as well. So without further ado, thanks for joining us. We want you to download our podcast, please, and make sure you're subscribed so that you get it every week and never miss it. Every Tuesday, it'll come to your phone and you will listen immediately because you are on pins and needles waiting for what we will say. So please download it. Please give a 5-star review. That helps get circulation. It helps more people to know about us. We will love comments if you can lead them there, both because people read the comments, but also we like to respond to them. And just connect with us further, comment on LinkedIn, send us messages. We'd love to hear your thoughts about it and what we can do for future episodes to help out. So just share broadly as well. Get this into other people's hands. We want it to be useful for them. So until next time, This has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in-between.
And you are John Clark, and I am
Joshua Hugo.